Humans have been always struggling for power. The concept and essence of power are always present in politics. Absolutism was a political ideology and a form of government that was present in almost all Europe during the 17th and the 18th century. The principles of absolutism is that power accredits in only one person that has no limitation over any political institution. His power is unique, indivisible, and intranscendental. During this period of time, the kings had the right to govern by the mandate of the divine laws, creating therefore an absolute state in which kings were the maximum level of authority. There have been many philosophers that have tried to describe the nature of power in the humankind, as well as the fundamental of absolute states. These philosophers tried to understand the concentration of power, the preserval of particular interests, and the desires of expansion. This work will explain the vision of power from two great philosophers, Niccolò Machiavelli and Thomas Hobbes. Niccolò di Bernardo de Machiavelli was born in Florence, Italy in 1469. He is considered the father of the modern political science and wrote one of the most important works of politics, The Prince. To understand the Machiavellian thought, we have to first understand the historical forces that led him to write The Prince. Machiavelli lived a set of different political crises in Florence. When he was young, Florence was living the greatness of the Renaissance under the rule of Lorenzo de' Medici. Machiavelli will later on dedicate The Prince to him. During this period, there was a remarkable development in literature, arts, and science. According to Günther, the Renaissance brought tensions to the European unity, and this led to the flourishing of nationalism and absolutism. But in Italy, the political issues were on decadence. This made philosophers think of new values that could fulfill the interest of progress. Florence lived the fall of the Medici order in 1494. This year coincided with Machiavelli joining his social service as a secretary. Later on, in 1512, the Medici order returned to power and Machiavelli was captured and tortured by the Medici order because of a supposed conspiracy against them. Years later, it's set free and exiled to his hometown in San Casciano, where he started writing his masterpiece. The government of the Medicis is going to last from 1512 to 1527. The unstable political situation inspired Machiavelli to rethink how a prince needs to act in situations such as facing their enemies, control of his kingdom, retain their words and the survival of the state, and also to criticize the church and its role in politics during this era.
Human nature according to Machiavelli. Machiavelli's work, The Prince, shows a conception of human nature as something perverted, egoist, and ambitious. Even he believed in a republican system that could ensure the welfare of people. He appoints that leaders or princes should act for the welfare of the state and its interests, but mainly for their maintenance of power. In Machiavelli's view, rulers disobeyed convention in order to retain power, and men were naturally vicious creatures that did not willfully conform to reason. Machiavelli argued that the prince must be ruthless, for no man can ultimately be trusted. Division among the people leads to a weaker state, and the weaker state will be eventually fail. The prince is the one figurehead of the state. His interests to keep power and order are directly tied to the interests of the state and the welfare of his citizens. His main purpose was to create a stable and organized state under a good leader. He said that the authority of the ruling lies in their strength and craftiness. The exercise of power may require using immoral means, rejecting any ethical or moral rule in favor of reason or efficacy. Any way of exercising the power can be honorable if it is contribute to the reaching of the preservation of life and of the state. So much of what Machiavelli recommends may seem today in a different political context shocking or immoral, but he sees it differently because he has seen what has happened to men who act in a virtuous way.
Thomas Hobbes was born in 1588. Almost all his life he witnessed wars and conflicts. He translated the Thucydides Peloponnesian War. In his work, he learns that democracy is inadequate and that the wisdom of one person is much greater than the wisdom of many. At Hobbes' time, he was looking at the English Civil War. He lived the effects of it, and for him that will lead to the account of creating the state of nature. He saw what it is to have a situation where you don't have a sovereign authority. When it's a war of all against all, and no one respects law or rules, morality is based on the strongest. That's why you need a legitimate state. All these experiences led him to write the Leviathan. All men have in common the fact of disparaging the other and value only their own talents. And even Hobbes declares that the main problem among men is competition. Competition generates discord and unreal potential war situation, a war of all against all. This makes us create a pact with society and create a state. For Hobbes, the Leviathan was the way to preserve peace, coexistence, and conservation. Hobbes maintains that no one is secure and impenetrable in his system with absences of authority, and that people seek a greater standard of living, so he believes that people will be willing to give up their rights to do whatever they wish in favor of a moral system. However, there is no guarantee that if a person behaves morally, others will do the same. He does not believe that people will be forced by social convention to behave morally. He argues that it can be to a person's advantage to behave immorally while others act morally, so it can be expected of anyone to behave this way.
He concludes that the only way to make society act in a moral manner is for a supreme governance to exist, which can enforce morality through terror or punishment. Therefore, in order to ensure their own preservation and survival in an anarchic system, Hobbes argues that people seek to form commonwealths, where people are forced to follow morality. Ultimately, Hobbes justifies morality on a basis that it promotes self-interest and survival. Hobbes believed that his own political philosophy, if accepted, could help produce and maintain a state of peace. According to Hobbes, humans could escape from a civil war, metaphorically represented by the state of nature, only by accepting a sovereign with absolute power. For him, the transition from a state of nature to an organized political settlement occurs when individuals make a political covenant with each other. Peace requires the institution of an absolute sovereign, a ruler, who has the final say of all ethical, religious, and political matters. Hobbes stipulates that divine right was wrong and nonsense, and that the social contract, as an important consequence of the fact, is that the sovereign cannot be accused of being unjust, because injustice is the breaking of a covenant.
We can conclude that Hobbes and Machiavelli have certain similarities and differences within their thought. Machiavelli believed and based his thoughts on the fact that laws and institutions could conduct to perfection in a state. Similarly, Hobbes believes that the state of nature, a hypothetical state void of laws and institutions of legal enforcement, is equivalent to war. Furthermore, both of them are critical of the power of the church but believe that the state ought to be secular. After all, rulers' affairs end up being the world's affairs. Likewise, Machiavelli agrees with Hobbes to some extent that people are generally self-interested, although their affection for others can be won and lost. But Hobbes held an even lower estimation of human nature than him. He sees that the only hope for society is to be ruled by a sovereign power, as man is naturally at the lowest possible level of morality. Fear is the only tool. If a sovereign makes you fear the consequences of not doing right, you'll eventually obey. Even though Machiavelli asserts that a number of traits are inherent in human nature, he drew these conclusions through practical observation. Vicky Sullivan, in her book Machiavelli, Hobbes, and the Formation of a Liberal Republicanism in England, states that both Hobbes and Machiavelli's thoughts helped found the concept of liberal republicanism, since it appears as the ideal type of state for both of them. Although Hobbes turns out a bit more complicated because he would have probably accepted any type of sovereign as a way to get everyone out of the state of nature that the Civil War remarked on them.
Hobbes and Machiavelli both see divine right as a wrong and nonsense, since Machiavelli relies on the idea that traits and merits of a ruler are more than any type of right you say you have. And Hobbes, while explaining the concept of the social contract, states that the right to rule laid on ordinary people who gave kings power.